In March 1989, the South Armagh Brigade of the Irish Republican Army, IRA, carried out a bold, meticulously planned ambush near the border, killing two senior officers of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, RUC. The attack became one of the most high-profile blows against British policing in the north during the final phase of the conflict, known colloquially as the Troubles. In the years that followed, claims emerged of Gardaí in the south tipping off the IRA, allegedly enabling Republicans to prepare and execute the ambush. The ambush was the culmination of an extended surveillance campaign lasting most of 1988 and 1989 by the IRA's elite South Armagh unit, whose operations had long frustrated British forces along the heavily militarised border between North and South. The RUC, whose reputation was shaped by decades of sectarianism and repression in support of the Unionist state, had long been a central target of Republican military operations. But the killing of Chief Superintendent Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan marked a significant escalation and a symbolic coup for the IRA. The ambush came at a time when the British government was stepping up its war against the Republican movement in the north. It exposed even the most senior police figures' vulnerability, delivering a humiliating blow to the RUC and its political masters. The killings would also prompt the government in the south to establish the Smiddik Tribunal, a multi-million-pound investigation tasked with determining whether Gardaí colluded with the IRA by tipping off the South Armagh Brigade about the RUC officers' movements. By the late 1980s, the conflict in the north of Ireland had entered a complex and transitional phase. The armed struggle remained active, but was now defined by heightened surveillance, deepening political manoeuvring, and increased military sophistication on both sides. For the IRA, the 1980s marked a strategic shift toward high-impact operations aimed at symbolic and politically sensitive targets. From the Brighton hotel bombing that nearly killed the notoriously hardline British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, to mortar and roadside bomb attacks that caused heavy losses among the British Army and RUC. The organisation also expanded its campaign beyond Ireland and Britain, striking British military personnel in mainland Europe. After nearly 2 decades of conflict, the IRA had evolved into a tightly coordinated guerrilla force, especially in strongholds like South Armagh, where operations were disciplined, intelligence-led, and grounded in intimate local knowledge. By the late 1980s, the campaign had become a sustained war of attrition. Some of the most significant engagements of this period reflected the intensifying nature of that conflict and the IRA's determination to strike at the heart of British authority, despite mounting risks. In April 1987, Lord Justice Maurice Gibson and his wife Cecily were killed near the border by a remote-controlled IRA bomb shortly after returning from the south, a stark reminder of the IRA's expanding intelligence capabilities. The following month, 8 IRA volunteers from the East Tyrone Brigade were killed by the SAS during an attack on the RUC barracks at Local. While the scale of the loss was devastating, the operation underlined the IRA's strategic focus on fortified British infrastructure and its readiness to mount bold, heavily armed operations despite the risks. On the other side, the British state escalated its dirty war, fusing ever more sophisticated electronic surveillance with a long-cultivated network of informers and double agents embedded deep inside Republican communities. The web of agencies involved, MI5, the RUC's notorious special branch, and the British Army's Covert Force Research Unit, FRU, worked to infiltrate, manipulate, and control the Republican movement from within. Far from acting as a single command, these bodies often pulled in different directions, hoarding intelligence, undermining each other's operations, and fighting turf wars for power and influence. In parallel, covert military death squads, such as the SAS and 14 Intelligence Company, were increasingly unleashed under rules of engagement that blurred, and often erased, the line between policing, assassination, and collusion with loyalist paramilitaries, a trend that would continue into the 1990s. In nationalist communities, The late 1980s remained a time of daily repression. House raids, stop and searches, internment by stealth, and a judicial system stacked in favour of the state. The RUC, bolstered by special branch and emergency powers, was seen not as a civilian police force, but as an armed wing of British rule, and a legitimate target for IRA operations. Yet beneath the surface, political strategies were beginning to stir. Sinn Féin's 1986 decision to end abstentionism from Parliament in the southern state marked a turning point: the formal adoption of the Armalite and ballot box strategy. This dual military political approach, blending armed struggle with electoral participation, reflected a calculated shift in Republican thinking. Crucially, it occurred without diluting the primacy of the armed struggle, which remained central to the movement's aims. In short, the late 1980s marked a mature and intensifying chapter in the war. While the British state sought to infiltrate, demoralise, and contain the Republican struggle through surveillance and covert force, the IRA focused on symbolic and strategic operations designed to assert military strength, undermine British authority, and maintain momentum in the broader fight for national liberation. By 1989, Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan were among the most senior officers in the Royal Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland, and among the most notorious symbols of Britain's pseudo-paramilitary policing throughout the conflict. Harry Breen, the RUC's top officer in County Armagh, was a familiar figure to the public. He frequently appeared on television following IRA attacks, projecting an image of authority and resolve. He was famously photographed posing with a cache of weapons seized from the IRA unit, killed in the 1987 Loch Allenbush, a major British intelligence operation that resulted in the deaths of 8 IRA volunteers and a civilian. The image showed Breen using a wooden stick to point at the weapons, and it appeared beneath the sensational newspaper headline, "Wipeout. Provo Death Squad Blasted." For many Republicans, the photograph symbolised Breen's deep involvement in Britain's dirty war in Ireland. A South Armagh IRA volunteer later remarked, "This image was etched on every Republican's mind." As divisional commander for counties Armagh and Down, Breen chaired high-level RUC briefings, maintained direct contact with British Army intelligence and special branch, and oversaw arms raids targeting both Republican and Loyalist stockpiles across Armagh. But it was in this same role that Breen is alleged to have colluded with Loyalist paramilitaries, including factions involved in the paramilitary alliance behind the major South African arms shipment that began arriving in late 1987. Ulster Resistance was a Loyalist paramilitary group formed in 1986 in reaction to the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which, for the first time, gave the Southern government a consultative role in the affairs of the Northern Unionist state. The group was launched with the backing of senior Democratic Unionist Party figures, including Peter Robinson, a fact that underscored the close, often unspoken, relationship between mainstream unionism and Loyalist violence. Though Ulster Resistance styled itself as a grassroots defence movement, in reality, it embodied the entrenched sectarianism and anti-democratic reflexes of hardline unionism, committed to resisting even the most modest forms of cross-border cooperation. In a deal brokered by Loyalist and British Army agent Brian Nelson, Ulster Resistance, working in alliance with the Ulster Volunteer Force, UVF, and the Ulster Defence Association, UDA, helped import a massive consignment of weapons from apartheid South Africa. It was a regime with which loyalism shared an ideology of supremacist territorial control. The shipment included VZ-58 assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, dramatically increasing the killing capacity of Loyalist death squads. These weapons were soon deployed in a wave of sectarian massacres targeting nationalist civilians. Ulster Resistance's refusal to decommission, and its quiet disappearance from public view in the 1990s, reflects the political cover and deliberate blind eye of the British state that so often enabled Loyalist violence. In a 2017 investigation for Village magazine, journalist Deirdre Young detailed how sources from mid-Ulster, with knowledge of the Ulster Resistance Arms operation, said the original plan was for the entire cash to be delivered to a man in Markethill, who would act as quartermaster. But suspicion that he was working for multiple intelligence agencies meant the weapons never reached him. Instead, they were first stored in a barn between Tandragee and Markethill, and later hidden inside a military ambulance parked at the Territorial Army Centre in Armagh City. From that point, the sources said, the cash was out of Ulster resistance control, but not out of the reach of the security forces. According to multiple loyalist and former security force sources, RUC Chief Superintendent Harry Breen acted as a conduit between the arms hiders and the search teams, passing on operational plans so the weapons could be moved ahead of raids. Breen's IRA diary, obtained by Young, places him at the heart of the arms searches across Armagh and South Down in 1988 and early 1989. His presence was logged at search sites in Tandragee, Hamilton's Bawn, Markethill and Lochgilly, all linked to the missing cash. Despite his senior rank, he attended almost every search personally, liaising closely with CID, Special Branch and British Army units. The sources alleged this was not diligence, but sabotage. Breen's recorded movements and the total failure of the operations he directed to recover a single Ulster resistance weapon point to a senior RUC officer actively frustrating searches to protect Loyalist arms. According to these sources, Breen was no rogue cop. He was following an intelligence agenda under which Loyalist paramilitaries were to be cultivated, armed and shielded from the law, a policy that ensured the state's allies could continue their sectarian campaign with impunity. Key allegations about Breen's relationship with Loyalists were laid out in a chilling 1999 affidavit by John Weir, a former RUC sergeant in the South Armagh-based Special Patrol Group, SPG, a unit which, he alleged, operated as RUC by day and Loyalist paramilitaries by night. Weir, who was imprisoned in 1980 for sectarian murder, claimed that during the 1970s, Breen had supplied weapons to the UVF in Portadown and maintained close ties with ERUC Constable William Billy McBride, a Newry-based officer and gunsmith for the UVF, who, using his police training and access to facilities, modified weapons for use in sectarian killings. Both men, Weir alleged, were members of what journalists and researchers would later term the Glenanne Gang, a covert alliance of Loyalist paramilitaries, rogue RUC officers, and UDR soldiers, responsible for more than 100 sectarian murders. Their operations were coordinated from a farm in Glenanne, County Armagh, owned by RUC reservist James Mitchell. Weapons were stored there, and bombs, including those used in the Dublin and Monaghan atrocities, were assembled. According to Sunday World reports, Mitchell even asked trusted RUC colleagues to provide a security cordon around the farm while bombs were being constructed, an extraordinary detail that underscores the depth of alleged state collusion. In one especially disturbing revelation, Weir claimed that after he privately confessed to Breen about the murder of an innocent Catholic civilian, Breen told him simply, forget about it. Breen's alleged conduct placed him squarely within what campaigners have described as a nexus of state-sanctioned terror. Weir's testimony was later examined by Mr. Justice Henry Barron, the Irish Supreme Court judge appointed to investigate the 1974 Dublin and Monaghan bombings, the deadliest attacks of the conflict, carried out by British state-backed Loyalist terrorists. In his final report, Barron described Weir's account as credible, detailed, and internally consistent. The allegations reinforced a growing body of evidence suggesting Breen had, for years, acted as a conduit between the RUC and Loyalist death squads, operating with state complicity in the so-called murder triangle. Additional testimony cited by journalist Deirdre Young in Village magazine came from a former UDR soldier who chillingly remarked, "If Breen had lived, there would have been no ceasefire." To many in Loyalist and security force circles, Breen was a hardliner, implacably opposed to any political settlement, and a senior figure at the cutting edge of Britain's dirty war in Ireland. By the late 1980s, South Armagh had arguably become one of the most heavily surveilled and militarized regions in the world. Rural communities lived under a regime of constant observation, fortified outposts, and intrusive patrols. British military helicopters thundered overhead, watchtowers loomed over villages, and soldiers moved through the countryside as an occupying force. A British commanding officer candidly described the approach to journalist Desmond Hamill. What they were used to were soldiers rushing into pubs, knocking glasses off the bar, grabbing people by the hair, rushing them into the fort, sometimes with bare feet across broken glass, shoving them into a chopper, and without them having any idea what was going on or why they had been arrested. This was a region governed not by law, but by coercion, where oppression and brutalization were routine, and often deadly. In 1976, 12-year-old Magella O'Hare was walking to confession through the quiet village of Whitecross when she was shot in the back by a British paratrooper. The army initially claimed they had come under fire, a lie that unravelled years later when the government admitted her killing was unjustified. Her death became an enduring symbol of the violence and impunity that defined British rule in South Armagh. South Armagh has long been a stronghold of resistance to foreign rule, earning a reputation as one of the most defiant regions in Ireland. From the days of colonial plantation in the 17th century to the more recent conflict with the Unionist state, the area has consistently rejected British authority. During the War of Independence, it was a hotbed of IRA activity, a tradition of armed struggle deeply rooted in the local population's historical memory. One of the most dramatic episodes from that era was the 1921 Atavoyle train ambush, in which IRA volunteers attacked a British troop train, killing several soldiers and derailing the convoy of 15 carriages. The attack sent shockwaves through the British establishment and became emblematic of South Armagh's reputation for audacious guerrilla tactics, a legacy that would resurface nearly 70 years later on the Eden-Appa Road, just a few miles from the site of the War of Independence ambush. From the early 1970s onward, the Provisional IRA's South Armagh Brigade developed and refined a deadly arsenal of command-wire detonated roadside bombs, carefully concealed and remotely triggered from cover. Often planted in culverts beneath country lanes, these devices created deep craters that would appear in news footage filled with burst drain water after detonation. British patrols faced persistent risk as their movements were monitored, routes assessed, and convoys increasingly targeted with precision by roadside bombs. Some attacks were coordinated with secondary ambushes, targeting the follow-up search teams or security cordons that responded to the initial blast. The memory of such attacks endured long after the war. Writing on a British Army online forum, a former soldier described experiencing flashbacks triggered by the smell of freshly turned soil and diesel fuel. The intensification of the campaign by the mid-1970s prompted the official arrival of the SAS in 1976. Elite forces were deployed to the region in an effort to counteract the growing effectiveness of IRA operations. Their presence marked a shift in British strategy, from conventional military policing to covert intelligence-led operations that blurred the boundaries between law enforcement and assassination. Yet for all this escalation, the British continued to lose control of the roads. South Armagh became a zone where the movement of British troops by road had become almost impossible. Heavily armoured vehicles, such as ferrets and Saracens, patrolled the roads in the early years, but they offered little long-term protection. By the mid-1980s, the British Army had effectively abandoned the road network altogether. The IRA had denied them the ground. In response, the British military adopted a policy of total aerial reliance. All troop movements, supply runs, mail delivery, and even waste removal were conducted by helicopter. Bessbrook Mill, a converted linen factory in County Armagh, was transformed into the region's principal military base and, at the height of the conflict, became the busiest heliport in Europe, and possibly the world. Soldiers were flown in and out of isolated barracks like Crossmaglen, which itself became synonymous with British military isolation. For local people, the thudding rotors overhead became an inescapable soundtrack, shaking windows, scattering livestock, and reinforcing the sense of living under siege, a practice that continued well beyond the ceasefires of the 1990s. The South Armagh Brigade of the IRA fought it with discipline, patience, and precision. By the late 1980s, the brigade had established a reputation, even among British military analysts, as one of the most effective guerrilla forces in the world. Operations were marked by planning, intelligence, and a deep knowledge of terrain and community. IRA volunteers were often full-time operatives, and units were rooted in the rural communities that surrounded them, giving them an intimate understanding of roads, patrol habits, sightlines, and escape routes. IRA operations in South Armagh typically relied on local reconnaissance, an arsenal of Libya and US-sourced, as well as custom-built weapon systems, and strict internal discipline. Mistakes were rare, and when they occurred, they were not often repeated. It wasn't the scale of the IRA's arsenal that kept the British state on the back foot in the border region, but the precision and discipline behind each operation. This quiet effectiveness enabled a series of deadly and coordinated strikes, from regular sniper attacks and remote detonated bombs to ambushes by squads of up to a dozen volunteers that left British forces disoriented and reactive. The South Armagh Brigade was built around close-knit units of rural upbringing, shrewd men and women deeply familiar with the fields, lanes, and back roads of their home ground. Among them were Brendan Burns and Brendan Moley, who died in an accidental explosion when a bomb they were transporting detonated prematurely as they loaded it into a van near Crossmaglen. Intended for an attack on newly built British military infrastructure, the device instead claimed the lives of two of the brigade's most committed operators. In the aftermath, the RUC taunted their families and obstructed efforts to recover the men's bodies. The funerals became the focus of an extraordinary state operation. Around 2,000 RUC officers and British soldiers, ferried in for the occasion, surrounded the cortèges. In unforgettable scenes for the people of South Armagh, riot-clad police and soldiers with Alsatian dogs clashed violently with mourners, part of a long-standing state policy of disrupting and frustrating Republican funerals. It later emerged that the entire operation, ostensibly to prevent an IRA tribute, was directed by RUC Chief Superintendent Harry Breen. A string of high-profile IRA operations, including the assassination of Lord Lewis Mountbatten in Sligo and the killing of 18 British soldiers in the Warren Point ambush, both on 27 August 1979, coincided with a significant expansion of British military surveillance, as a web of watchtowers, fortified outposts, and listening posts was built across the border region. These attacks were executed by some of the most experienced engineers in the South Armagh IRA, including Brendan Burns, whose technical skill and operational precision shaped British strategic responses in the years that followed. To reinforce its hold over the region, the British Army constructed a network of fortified watchtowers and observation posts across the hills of South Armagh. In June 1986, the British military seized huge tracts of land along the border to construct the watchtowers. Key installations were positioned on strategic high ground at Crossmaglen, Forkhill, Glassdrummond, Creve Kieran, Clough Mountain and beyond, each equipped with high-powered cameras, night vision systems, radar, and signal interception technology. Linked by secure military communications and supported by aerial reconnaissance, these outposts maintained round-the-clock visibility over key roads, border crossings, and the homes of suspected IRA volunteers. Within weeks of the construction of the post at Glassdrummond, the IRA launched a rocket attack that nearly completely demolished the installation. For years after, the surveillance towers would continue to be subjected to IRA mortar and sniper attacks. From these elevated positions, British forces monitored the movement of vehicles and individuals along narrow country lanes, feeding the data into military databases. Vengeful logged vehicle number plates in an effort to track and identify suspects, while Crucible compiled intelligence files on more than 1 million people in the north, Together, these systems cast a digital net of suspicion over a landscape the state could no longer fully control on the ground. The towers loomed over rural communities not only as tools of surveillance, but as ever-present reminders of occupation. The surveillance towers became enduring symbols of Britain's war in Ireland, and, by 1989, would feature at the centre of controversy surrounding the Jonesboro ambush. In the spring or early summer of 1988, an IRA volunteer observed a red Vauxhall Cavalier, registration KIB 1204, entering Dundalk Garda station through the Carrickmacross Road entrance. Two men exited the car. The volunteer recognised the front seat passenger as someone he believed to be RUC Detective Nigel Day, though he wasn't certain of the name, while the driver, unidentified at the time, was later confirmed to be Superintendent Bob Buchanan. This single sighting, seemingly minor, prompted a chain of surveillance that would eventually culminate in the deaths of Buchanan and his superior, Chief Superintendent Harry Breen. IRA planners assumed that if RUC detectives were meeting Gardaí in Dundalk once, they might do so again, and in the same car. Casual surveillance began, with volunteers walking or driving past the station to log any recurrence of the red car. After several successful sightings, the IRA elevated its surveillance efforts. They identified a derelict property at number 12, the Crescent, located just across from Dundalk Garda station. It offered a clear, unobstructed view of the station's front entrance. Access was gained by scaling the rear garden wall under cover of darkness, a wall that still stands today. The house had no electricity, no phone line, and no running water. Entry and exit were strictly limited to nighttime hours, as volunteers took extreme care not to alert neighbouring residents whose houses overlooked the property. Surveillance was carried out from the front upstairs bedroom, where a tattered net curtain hung across the window. This allowed volunteers to observe without being seen, while maintaining the appearance of a neglected home. The room was otherwise completely empty, except for a rolled-up carpet in the middle of the floor. Each shift was a marathon of quiet solitude and vigilance, embodying the patient discipline for which South Armagh IRA operations were renowned. The volunteer assigned to the post would typically enter at 5 a.m. and remain until 10 p.m., especially during the longer daylight hours of summer. Because they could not leave without compromising the position, they had to bring food, water, and any provisions with them. There was no heating, no light, and no way to communicate externally. If any suspicious activity was seen by the neighbours, even once, the entire operation would have been blown. The post was manned on an irregular but sustained basis from summer 1988 through early 1989, depending on sightings of the car and broader IRA operational priorities. Slowly, the pattern of movement began to emerge. The red Cavalier reappeared on a consistent schedule, often on Mondays and Tuesdays, and usually parked in the same spot for around 3 hours. The IRA noted a correlation between these visits and major IRA incidents in South Armagh, suggesting, in their assessment, that RUC officers travelled to Dundalk shortly after significant events, possibly for briefings or intelligence sharing with Garda counterparts. For a period of 6 to 8 weeks, the car disappeared, leading the IRA to fear the operation had gone cold. However, casual surveillance picked it up again, reportedly travelling north of Dundalk, and eventually back in place at the Garda station. The surveillance intensified once more. Then came the breakthrough. One afternoon, an IRA volunteer spotted the red Cavalier driving slowly through the village of May, heading toward Newry. Inside was a passenger instantly recognised by the volunteer, Chief Superintendent Harry Breen. The identification was made based on media images, including news bulletins and press photography, in the aftermath of the 1987 Loch ambush, in which 8 IRA men and a civilian were killed by the SAS in a shoot-to-kill operation. This sighting confirmed what the IRA had suspected, that the vehicle was used by senior RUC figures, and also provided vital intelligence about their cross-border route. Given its position, the car must have crossed via Forkhill or nearby secondary roads, avoiding the more heavily monitored Killeen crossing, where previous IRA attacks had put British forces on edge. The Meg sighting suggested not only vulnerability, but a window of opportunity, with confirmation that the Red Cavalier was being used by senior RUC personnel. The IRA transitioned from passive surveillance to an active military plan. According to the testimony of a former IRA commander before the Smiddik Tribunal, which examined alleged Garda collusion in the ambush, the decision followed months of dogged, methodical work and was grounded in long-established IRA doctrine: gather intelligence, identify patterns, and strike with precision. This was a classic IRA operation, he said. A small snippet of information came in, and we applied surveillance until we got to a position we could then go to a military operation. By late 1988, IRA leadership concluded that the car appeared frequently enough to justify escalation. A full communication system was put in place to support the operation. This network combined radios, landlines, and face-to-face relays in order to avoid British electronic surveillance. Volunteers stressed to the tribunal that radio silence was maintained until the target was definitively identified, since early transmissions risked alerting RUC or British Army listening posts. The process was disciplined and multi-layered. From number 12, the Crescent, the house used to mount surveillance on Dundalk Garda station, a volunteer would confirm the red car's arrival. That volunteer would then meet a scout at a pre-arranged location in the town, who relayed the sighting to an IRA operations coordinator. Only after this human confirmation would the code word be issued, using radios to activate the ASUs on standby. 2 heavily armed ASUs active service units, each comprising 6 volunteers, were assigned to cover the full span of possible border crossings. One was stationed near Forkhill, covering Carrickastickan and Tiefcrum roads, and the other near Jonesboro, covering Eden Apa, Flurry Bridge, Killeen, and other nearby routes. These teams did not sit visibly on the roadside. Rather, they waited in concealed locations, often in remote farmyards or quiet lanes, chosen for their proximity to key crossings and minimal risk of exposure, prepared to move only once the car was confirmed as heading toward their assigned zone. To execute the ambush, the IRA used a van as a mobile platform to transport the ASU and stage the checkpoint. According to IRA testimony, the vehicle was not stolen specifically for the Eden Napa operation, but rather drawn from a standing pool of operational vehicles routinely acquired and kept on hand. The IRA had a fleet of vehicles, one volunteer told the tribunal. We didn't plan on a Saturday night for a Monday morning. Stealing vans was ongoing. The van in question was deemed ideal for the job, large enough to discreetly transport men and arms, and nondescript enough to be used without drawing suspicion. The operation was not rushed. In fact, the IRA ran at least 3, and possibly 4, aborted military deployments between late 1988 and March 1989. On 2 occasions, the Red Cavalier simply failed to appear. On a 3rd attempt, the car was tracked all the way back to the Eden Apa Road, but the ASU detected increased British Army activity in the area, including helicopter surveillance and troop movement, and chose to stand down rather than risk detection. This restraint was characteristic of the South Armagh Brigade, widely regarded as the most professional and operationally sophisticated of all IRA units. Known for its strategic patience and meticulous planning, the South Armagh IRA routinely aborted operations when conditions weren't ideal, even after days of effort. As one volunteer explained to the Smiddik Tribunal, it was not uncommon for the IRA to wait weeks for the right opportunity. This methodical approach not only increased their operational success rate, it also had a psychological effect, keeping British security forces in a permanent state of high alert along the border. The IRA didn't have to strike often. They just had to convince their enemies that a strike was always possible. IRA volunteers testified that aborting was standard procedure and that it was not uncommon for ASUs to spend long days in position, only to pack up at night and return to safe houses. "You just dump your arms and go home," one said. According to their account, this patience, even after failed attempts, was what ultimately made the operation a success. They were learning from every dry run, refining routes, improving timing, and testing enemy reaction times. On the 6th of March, 2 weeks before the ambush, and according to Harry Breen's diary, the Chief Superintendent attended a dinner at Stormont, where the then British Secretary of State for the Northern Statelet, Tom King, thumped the table and demanded a cross-border operation between the Gardaí and Rook to target alleged fuel smuggling at a farm owned by a leading Irish Republican. According to testimony later given to the Smiddik Tribunal by Breen's deputy, Breen was unhappy with what he saw as exaggerated reports presented to King about the farm's activities. The property, a frequent target of British Army and SAS raids, straddled the border, roughly half in the south, the rest in the north. In 1986, one of 18 advanced and heavily fortified British watchtowers was built specifically to monitor the farmer, who was alleged at the time to be the IRA's chief of staff. In a sign of the intense IRA surveillance along the border, former RUC Inspector Charles Day testified that on the 14th of March, just days before the ambush, he left a meeting with Gardaí at Dundalk Station and realised they were being followed by a Toyota Hiace van, a vehicle that aroused suspicion due to its popularity with the South Armagh IRA. In an ironic twist, the car in which Day was a passenger was driven by Superintendent Bob Buchanan. The Toyota van, potentially carrying a team of heavily armed IRA volunteers, was now being watched by Buchanan in the rearview mirror and followed the two Rook men quite a way up into the north before dropping away ahead of a British manned vehicle checkpoint. British Army reports, according to testimony at the Smiddik Tribunal, indicated that there was evidence to suggest there was targeting carried out by PIRA on Buchanan's car. On the morning of Monday, the 20th of March, 1989, Breen and Buchanan set out for Dundalk Garda Station to discuss operational requirements for a planned raid on the heavily surveilled border farm. At approximately 12:30 p.m., Buchanan's red Cavalier pulled into its usual space outside the station. From the upstairs bedroom of number 12, the Crescent, the safe house used to watch the Garda station, a volunteer confirmed the car's arrival. As with previous sightings, he left the post to meet an IRA scout at a pre-arranged point in the town centre. This face-to-face exchange served as final visual confirmation. Only then was the code word passed through the IRA's layered communications network, a mix of radios, landlines, and physical relays designed to preserve operational security. The call activated the culmination of a months-long hunt for the red car and its RUC passengers. After at least 3, and possibly 4, aborted operations since late 1988, the South Armagh IRA judged the moment right. The plan was to stay active for up to 7 consecutive days, with a review every 3, a balance of flexibility, and the patient resolve that defined the brigade's operations. It was around this time that British Army surveillance logs began noting unusual activity near the Eden Appa Road. According to a Royal Regiment Fusiliers log sheet, 4 individuals were seen setting up a portable traffic light just minutes from the future ambush site. Within half an hour, they dismantled it, loaded it into a car, and drove away. This unusual activity came shortly after a significant shift in British Army behaviour in the area. The zone around the Eden Appa Road and Kilnasaggart Bridge was declared out of bounds to the RUC, a precaution designed to prevent the risk of British soldiers mistakenly engaging police vehicles during a major security sweep. The operation focused on surveillance and searches along the railway line connecting north and south, a frequent target of IRA bomb attacks. After 7 days of heightened troop activity, the Army pulled back at 11 a.m. on the 20th of March, just hours before the ambush. At the same time, British units in South Armagh detected a marked surge in radio transmissions known to originate from IRA networks. For all their sophisticated equipment, British intelligence was largely unable to penetrate the meaning of these coded conversations, laced with local slang, oblique references, and deliberate misdirection. The sudden burst of traffic likely marked the opening phase of the ambush, a coordinated mobilization involving dozens of volunteers, from lookouts to the gunmen lying in wait. That this mobilization coincided with the withdrawal of British troops from an area declared out of bounds only a week earlier pointed to the IRA's close understanding of British Army routines in the heavily militarised borderlands. Log sheets kept by the British Army's Royal Regiment of Fusiliers as part of the routine and heavy surveillance, in which soldiers spend 18-day shifts constantly watching local residents and movements, document a sequence of movements by suspected IRA volunteers from their homes in the region during the time of the surge in activity. One entry in the log sheets from Gulf 20 includes the word slabs, a reference to the man suspected by the British to be the IRA's Chief of Staff. Gulf 20 was the code name given to the massive watchtower, purpose-built to watch the movements in and around the border farm owned by the leading Irish Republican. Other watchtowers, including Romeo 2-1, overlooking the Jonesboro area, logged movements around 10 a.m. by the suspected IRA commander believed to be directing the ambush that would take place hours later. Once the order was given by the IRA commander, both active service units, each consisting of 6 armed volunteers, moved into position. The team based near Jonesboro was tasked with covering the Eden Upper, Flurry Bridge, Killeen, and Carrick Broad routes, while the other near Forkill covered the Carrickastickin and Teevcrum crossings. The Eden Upper Road, a narrow rural lane just north of the border, had long been identified as a likely route for the vehicle's return journey. IRA surveillance tracked the car as it left Dundalk around 2:30 p.m, passing the Harp Brewery, Castletown Road, and onto the Newry Road. As expected, the car proceeded toward Eden Upper Road, one of several lesser-known routes the IRA believed the RUC preferred in order to avoid the more dangerous and heavily monitored Killeen checkpoint. Buchanan's decision to take the dangerous route was said to stem from his faith in God's providence. The Jonesboro-based ASU, already briefed and ready, moved from a safe location to a pre-selected ambush point along Eden Upper Road. According to their account, they staged a checkpoint disguised as a British Army roadblock. The IRA, long constrained but now accustomed to the British Army's dystopian network of watchtowers across the South Armagh region, chose Dead Ground, a small and sloped section of the Eden Upper Road, concealed by trees, which could not be observed from the permanently manned British watchtower Romeo 2-1 on Jonesboro Hill. The elevated watchtower was one of over 30 fixed installations along the border that were equipped with high-powered optics, thermal imaging and night vision systems, electronic listening and signal intercept machines. A retired British Army brigadier, Mike Smith, later told the Smiddik Tribunal that the ambush spot was extremely well chosen. It was just across the border in Northern Ireland. Once the car had elected to travel on the Eden Upper Road, there were very few opportunities to turn off before the illegal vehicle checkpoint, and the position was such that it would not have been visible from any security force location or easily visible from the air because of tree coverage. At around 3:30 p.m, the Toyota van carrying the ambush squad from Jonesboro arrived at Eden Upper Road. 2 IRA volunteers disembarked and took up positions on either side of the narrow country lane, using the trees, hedgerows, and low foliage for concealment. The van carrying the remaining 4 volunteers continued toward the border, idling near McJoe's service station. There it waited for a CB radio transmission from a volunteer positioned at the Y junction with the main Dundalk-Newry Road, confirming that the target vehicle was en route. Roughly 10 minutes later, the 2 volunteers in concealed roadside positions stepped out to halt civilian vehicles approaching from the north, a sign that the Red Cavalier had been visually confirmed by IRA spotters upstream. Dressed in combat clothing and wearing camouflage face paint, the volunteers ordered the drivers out of their cars and directed them to lie face down in the ditch beside the road. As walkie-talkies crackled, the inconspicuous Toyota Light Ace rolled quietly toward the ambush site. It was followed moments later by the target, Buchanan's vehicle. On seeing the men manning what appeared to be a regular army checkpoint, Buchanan began to brake. The light ace pulled past the already stopped traffic and came to a halt. Its side door slid open and 4 masked, heavily armed IRA volunteers disembarked with practiced speed. The volunteers, armed with Armalites and AKM assault rifles, lifted their weapons and challenged Breen and Buchanan to exit the vehicle in an attempt to detain the men. It is likely the IRA unit assumed the RUC officers would be armed. Yet, in reality, Breen and Buchanan carried no weapons at all. Realizing too late what was unfolding, Superintendent Bob Buchanan attempted to reverse out of the trap, but the vehicle stalled. He managed to restart the engine, while Chief Superintendent Harry Breen simultaneously reached for a radio concealed in the glove compartment, only to drop it in the chaos. The effort was futile. A concentrated burst of gunfire was directed into the driver's side of the vehicle. The car reversed off the narrow tarmac and slammed into a moss-covered stone wall. Buchanan was killed instantly by bullets to the head and chest. When his body was later recovered, his right foot was still pressed hard on the accelerator. With 4 members of the ambush team providing cover, 2 IRA volunteers approached the vehicle. One of them, armed with a Ruger Mini 14 rifle, fired a single shot to the head of Chief Superintendent Harry Breen, killing him instantly and blowing away part of his skull. A second shot was then fired into Superintendent Bob Buchanan, who remained slumped in the driver's seat, still strapped into his seatbelt. The bodies of both RUC men were thoroughly searched, with linings of their pockets pulled out. Breen's personal diary, warrant card, bank cards, and a telecom pager were collected by one volunteer, while the other removed the keys from the ignition and opened the car's boot and removed a briefcase. Breen's personal diary and documents contained within the briefcase recovered from Buchanan's car were later scrutinized by IRA intelligence. The phone number of Martin O'Hagan, former official IRA member and later investigative journalist, was reportedly discovered within Breen's diary. O'Hagan was abducted in September 1989 by one of the IRA ASUs involved in the Eden Appa Road ambush and handed over to a counterintelligence unit. O'Hagan, later released and quoted in the book Rebel Hearts by Kevin Toulis, spoke to the skill of the IRA interrogators in South Armagh. They were as good, if not better, than the cops. All their techniques were classic RUC techniques. They never hit me, but they threatened to hit me. They had guns. They even had a tape recorder. The Toyota driver, who had remained in the van throughout, waited for the team to re-embark before turning left toward Kilnasaggart Bridge and crossing the border, a rapid exfiltration route that had been rehearsed during at least 3 previous aborted ambushes. The British Army arrived shortly after the ambush and initiated a standard response, cordoning off the area and conducting a methodical search for booby trap devices. That evening, as darkness fell, a snow shower drifted over South Armagh, casting an eerie stillness over the ambush site. The bodies of the 2 RUC officers remained there overnight, not removed until the following afternoon, as the British feared that the IRA could have left an explosive device at or near the scene. British military assessments in the aftermath of the ambush characterized it as a highly professional and premeditated operation. An internal Army WISREP, Wider Information Situation Report, dated 23 March 1989, reported that 4 weapons were used, including 3 assault rifles and a Ruger Mini 14 rifle. Forensic analysis linked 2 of the Armalite rifles to previous IRA attacks. One had been used in a helicopter ambush at Silverbridge in June 1988, and the other in a killing at Culloquially in September 1987. The investigating officer described the Eden Appa ambush as a professional ambush sprung from a well-chosen site, noting that the IRA had fired from concealment among buildings and tree cover, which shielded them from view. A lieutenant colonel from the 1st Royal Regiment of Fusiliers echoed this assessment, calling it a classic example of the exploitation of patterns created by soft targets. He noted that the IRA had likely used a major surveillance operation based in the south and commended the planning and execution as ruthless. An unnamed, former high-ranking RUC officer described hearing of the deaths of the two RUC officers on March 20th. I was at my desk and the telex machine rattled away, notifying me of two dead bodies at the border. When the number of the car came in, I knew it was Bob's car and realised straight away what had happened, he said. He first phoned the Northern Ireland office. They asked me what those men were doing down there on their own. On 11 p.m. on Wednesday, 22nd March 1989, Downtown Radio aired a news bulletin carrying the IRA's claim of responsibility, which it had earlier provided to the radio station. In their statement, the IRA says that after shooting the police officers dead, they searched the vehicle in which the two RUC men were travelling from their security talks with the Gardaí in Dundalk, and they found the confidential documents. They say the documents relate to cross-border collaboration with the security forces, but they don't give any further specific details. The IRA say that the two top officers were shot dead after their car came to one of a number of checkpoints, which the IRA claims they were operating on Monday. They also say that the policemen acted suspiciously and attempted to drive off. Then, according to the IRA statement, the IRA volunteers feared their own lives could be in danger and took what they call preventative action to prevent the RUC men's escape. According to multiple Garda intelligence briefings, summarised by Detective Superintendent Brian Brunton before the Smiddik Tribunal, the IRA had maintained surveillance positions on at least 4 roads for more than a week prior to the attack. These included the Eden Appa, Jonesborough Road, the ambush site, the Dundalk Newry Road, the Omead Newry Road, and the Ballybinnaby Road near border crossing point 28. Additional intelligence, assessed as probably true and based on a previously reliable source, indicated that on the day of the killings, IRA units were also deployed on the Carrick-a-Stickin Road, with the largest concentration, comprising over 20 men, positioned along the Dundalk-Forkhill route. The report also named specific individuals believed to have been involved in both the planning and execution of the operation. Further intelligence, shared in a fax from Garda Detective Superintendent Tom Connolly to the RUC in Newry, revealed significant additional insights into the IRA's intentions. According to the report, the operation was initially designed as a kidnap mission, with the aim of interrogating Breen and Buchanan to uncover how the RUC had been tipped off ahead of the 1987 Loch ambush. The IRA reportedly wanted to extract the identity of the source who had betrayed that operation before executing the officers. The same report noted that a van, believed to be part of the IRA convoy, was seen parked at the Lees Do Arms on Newry Road in Dundalk and was observed overtaking the RUC vehicle before proceeding to Eden Appa, likely as part of a coordinated scouting strategy. Each IRA group involved reportedly had its own reconnaissance vehicle covering local routes. Connolly's intelligence also suggested that the killings were not part of the original plan. One of the gunmen may have panicked and opened fire when it appeared the officers were attempting to escape. The IRA had reportedly intended to block the road behind the Cavalier, but this part of the plan failed. Retired Detective Sergeant Sean Gethens, who later joined the investigative team, told the tribunal that the RUC officers had been making routine visits to multiple Garda stations along the border, including Dundalk, and were known to frequently leave their car parked outside, in full view. He noted that the IRA had likely been closely monitoring movements at these stations, with particular interest in Chief Superintendent Harry Breen. Further insights into the IRA's intent were provided by retired Detective Sergeant Sean Gethens, who had served on the Garda investigation team following the ambush. He told the tribunal that Chief Superintendent Harry Breen was the principal target of the operation. The IRA, he explained, believed that Breen may have had knowledge of the informant responsible for tipping off the British ahead of the 1987 Loch ambush, during which 8 IRA members were killed by the SAS. Breen had appeared on television in the aftermath of Lochgall, displaying recovered IRA weaponry, a public association that, in Gethens' view, made him a marked man. Gethens testified that the primary objective of the ambush was to abduct and interrogate Breen, not kill him immediately. The aim was to extract the identity of the suspected informant before executing both officers. He emphasized that if the IRA had simply wanted to kill them, they could have used a roadside bomb, as had been done in previous attacks such as those on the Hanna family and Lord Justice and Lady Gibson. Instead, they staged a live ambush, which he argued was evidence of their intent to capture and question. However, Gethens believed the operation went awry due to panic. In his view, one of the IRA volunteers likely opened fire prematurely, triggering the rest of the unit to shoot. Just because they were IRA men doesn't mean some fellas wouldn't just pull the trigger. He also highlighted the scale and sophistication of the operation. While Garda intelligence from April 1989 estimated that over 20 IRA members were involved, Gethens suggested that the actual number could have been between 60 and 100, a view consistent with British Army assessments. He described a large IRA presence not only on Eden Appa Road, but also on multiple surrounding routes, including the main road into Jonesboro. The operation, he said, had likely been underway for weeks, with IRA members lying in fields from dawn until dusk, and sometimes overnight, awaiting the right moment to strike. Finally, Gethens confirmed that the IRA would have required visual confirmation of Harry Breen before initiating the ambush. He stated that this could have been provided by anyone who knew him, suggesting the presence of an observer embedded within the surveillance teams. On 27 June 1989, just over 3 months after the ambush, the British mounted Operation Intellectual, an arrest operation targeting 17 IRA volunteers believed to have been involved in the ambush. According to a police report, none of these was cooperative, and all were released without charge. The same report, published by the Historical Inquiries Team, a unit of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, formerly the Royal Ulster Constabulary, includes a section titled Personalities, possibly linked to the murder of Chief Superintendent Breen and Superintendent Buchanan. Though the names of the suspected IRA volunteers are redacted, the references to ASUs in Camla, Crossmaglen, Inniskeen, Newry and Dundalk underline the experience and boldness of the South Armagh and border units. Many of those linked to the ambush had already served lengthy prison terms for IRA activity. One, in particular, went on to take part in the successful shooting down of a British Army Lynx helicopter on 23 June 1989, just 3 months after the ambush. The helicopter, struck by armour-piercing and incendiary rounds near Silverbridge, only 20 minutes from the ambush site, spun out of control before crash landing. A heavily armed IRA squad searched the area for the wreckage, but were unable to locate it. The day after the ambush, speculation about a possible security leak dominated media coverage. A front-page report in the Irish press, written by Fergal Keane, carried the headline, "Mole Fear in Double Killing." The article reported that investigators were examining whether a mole had tipped off the IRA about the movements of Chief Superintendent Breen and Superintendent Buchanan. The article read, "A hunt is underway to establish if a mole set up the 2 RUC officers shot dead by the IRA on the border yesterday." The article noted that the ambush had occurred shortly after the officers held talks with Garda anti-terrorist officers in Dundalk and observed that the killings were the third in a pattern of border attacks targeting senior northern officials. Previous attacks on Judges Maurice Gibson, 1987, and the Hanna family, 1988, had already raised suspicions that IRA operatives were receiving information from inside Garda ranks or from Dublin Airport. The Irish press report also cited unnamed senior Garda sources, one of whom called the killings a disaster for security cooperation. While Gardaí had previously dismissed the idea of a mole on the southern side, the article concluded that the ambush would fuel speculation and recriminations in Britain and the North about how the IRA continued to gain precise information on cross-border movements. However, despite the intense media speculation, a follow-up article on page 2 of the same edition of the Irish Press offered a more cautious note. It stated, "There is no suggestion from RUC sources that they believe details of the officers travelling, plans were leaked to the IRA by security forces in the Republic or the North, but one source last night said that the meeting had been arranged at the last minute. In an article published the same day as the ambush, the Irish Times security correspondent Sean Flynn reported that the Irish government was expected to order a top-level Garda investigation into how the IRA obtained information about the movements of Chief Superintendent Breen and Superintendent Buchanan. Under the headline, Gardaí to focus on breached security, Flynn wrote, "The government is expected to request the Garda authorities to begin a top-level investigation later today into how the IRA acquired information about the movements of the two senior RUC officers murdered yesterday evening." The article also recalled earlier allegations of Garda leaks, particularly following the IRA's 1987 roadside bomb attack that killed Lord Justice Gibson and Lady Gibson, whose car was ambushed on the border while travelling from Dublin to Belfast. Flynn noted that, although Unionist politicians had at the time accused the Gardaí of harbouring a mole, it later emerged that Lord Justice Gibson had ignored RUC security advice and made his travel arrangements in his own name. In the immediate aftermath of the ambush, both governments and police forces moved swiftly to counter growing media speculation about the existence of a Garda mole. On 21 March 1989, RUC Chief Constable Sir John Herman held a press conference in which he repeatedly insisted that the ambush was not the result of insider leaks. As reported in the Irish Times the following day, he stated, "I can say now categorically that the evidence which we have firmly confirms that there was no mole, and we ask that it should be discounted very firmly and very clearly." The allegation that the IRA was tipped off by a member of An Garda Síochána continued to resurface in the years following the ambush. In his 1999 book Bandit Country, journalist Toby Harnden reported claims that a Garda informally known as Garda X had passed information about the RUC officers' movements to the IRA. The controversy intensified in 2000 when Unionist MP Geoffrey Donaldson used parliamentary privilege to name Detective Sergeant Owen Corrigan as the alleged mole. Corrigan's legal team vehemently denied the claim during the Smiddik Tribunal, with his barrister stating, "That statement by Geoffrey Donaldson was a monstrous lie. It was false and my client wishes to establish the falsehood of it." These renewed allegations, and the mounting political pressure that followed, led directly to the establishment of the Smiddik Tribunal in 2005. While the tribunal ultimately found no direct evidence of Garda collusion, Judge Peter Smiddik concluded in 2013 that, although there was no smoking gun, he was satisfied there was collusion in the murders, and that the evidence points to the fact that there was someone within the Garda station assisting the IRA. On the publication of the 500-page report, a former Garda detective inspector, Jerry O'Carroll, who was in 2006 appointed an investigator into the ambush, said he was shocked and astonished by the content and tone of aspects of the report. Jerry Adams later wrote, "It is a fact that RUC officer Bob Buchanan was crossing the border on average 10 times each month, and on most occasions he travelled in his own car, which was readily identifiable." In his report, Justice Smiddik records, and I quote, "There was a general view that the RUC crossing the border were targets, and they, referring to RUC members, were all warned in relation to that. Clearly, the decision to continue to travel as frequently as they did across the border, without escort, left the RUC officers open to the real possibility of attack." Adams earlier said that the RUC officers were laissez-faire about their own security, but that RUC officers and IRA volunteers were doing their duty as they saw it.
Appendix 1, Final Approved Note by the South Armagh IRA. The following is the full text of a document titled Final Approved Note, provided by the South Armagh IRA to the Smiddik Tribunal. On March 20th, 1989, RUC Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and RUC Superintendent Bob Buchanan were killed at Jonesboro by an active service unit of the IRA attached to the South Armagh Brigade. This operation was executed as a result of lengthy and detailed surveillance initiated and conducted by IRA volunteers. At no time was there any input from the Gardaí or any other outside source or agency regarding the planning and execution of this operation. In the late spring, early summer of 1988, one of our volunteers spotted a red Cavalier car, registration number KYB 1204, entering the Dundalk Garda station complex from the Carrick-Ma Cross Road entrance. The car parked at the front of the station and two maids got out. The volunteer immediately recognized the front seat passenger as an RUC detective, who he believed was named Nigel Day, but was not certain of the name. He was approximately 40 years of age, 6 feet tall, black hair with a hint of grey. He had a thick black moustache and was wearing a jacket, shirt and tie. The volunteer did not recognize the driver, although we now know it to have been Bob Buchanan. The volunteer watched both men being admitted to the working area of Dundalk Garda Station. The volunteer was able to leave the vicinity of Dundalk Garda Station confident at not having been noticed by either of the two men. When this information was fed back by the volunteer to the IRA structures, it was decided to mount a surveillance operation around Dundalk Garda Station. This was initially done by designated volunteers driving and walking past and around Dundalk Garda Station. The focus was to locate the red Cavalier, but the presence of any northern registered vehicles was also to be noted. The red Cavalier was spotted on a number of occasions. It would be parked in roughly the same spot at the front of the station and would remain there for up to 3 hours. At that stage, it was decided to mount a more intense surveillance operation. This continued throughout the summer and winter of 1988 to 1989. During this period, a derelict house with a direct view of Dundalk Garda Station was identified and was used to conduct the majority of the surveillance on Dundalk Garda Station. The house was number 12, The Crescent, Dundalk. It's on the corner of the Crescent and Vincent Avenue. Refer to sketch. This sketch is set out in Appendix 2 to this report. Access was gained by scaling a garden wall at the back of the house at Vincent Avenue. The garden was overgrown. A concrete path ran to the back door. This door was wooden and was unlocked. This gave access to a kitchen area where, on turning right, you entered a rear living room and from there onto the main entrance hall. On the left-hand side of the hall was a wooden staircase. The surveillance was carried out from a large front bedroom window on the Vincent Avenue side of the house. This window was covered with an old, dirty net curtain. It gave cover to those carrying out the surveillance while affording them a clear view of Dundalk Garda Station. There was no furniture in the room except for an old rolled-up carpet sitting in the middle of the floor. The room was generally in a bad state of disrepair. There was no electricity supply to the house. Volunteers would enter and leave the house under cover of darkness, scaling the garden wall. On those occasions when the car was spotted, its make, colour and registration were always clearly identifiable and were noted. After a period of surveillance, a number of consistencies emerged. In the aftermath of any major incident in the South Armagh border region, the car would appear within days. Monday and Tuesday were more regular days for it to be seen. At one point, we thought that we had lost the operation as the car was not noticed for approximately 6 to 8 weeks. Information also came in that the car was spotted south of Dundalk heading north. For a period, casual surveillance was mounted around Drogheda Garda Station with no results. 2 other northern registered cars were noticed at Dundalk Garda Station. One was a black Audi, the other was a silver vehicle. We cannot recall its make or the registrations of either vehicle. We could not identify anyone linked to these cars, and it was decided to focus on the red Cavalier. After the 6 to 8 week gap, we picked up the red Cavalier again around late summer, early winter 1988. One of the surveillance teams made, what was for us, a significant breakthrough. The volunteer met the red Cavalier in Mull village at around 2 to 3 o'clock p.m. The car was travelling slowly through the village heading towards Newry. The volunteer recognized the front seat passenger as Harry Breen. Harry Breen had a high media exposure following the ambush in Lochal in 1987. We had video footage from news bulletins and photos from the press. He was, for obvious reasons, a target we had particular interest in. The car was also placed at Dundalk Garda Station earlier that same day. Equally significant was that given its location, the car had to have crossed border crossings around the Forkhill area. We assumed that they would vary their routes, and because of previous operations along the main Dublin-Belfast road at Killeen, they would not use that stretch on a regular basis. The surveillance operation was further intensified. We monitored Dundalk Garda Station more frequently and set up an elaborate communication system. That involved, among other things, radios and landlines. This enabled us to activate a wider surveillance team once the car was placed at Dundalk Garda Station. The task for this team was to monitor and track the car as it left Dundalk to travel north and cross the border. This was carried out successfully, and we soon established that they generally followed two routes: out onto the Carrickmagh Cross Road, past the Harp Lager Brewery, Pierce Park, McSwinney Street, Castletone Road, Bridge Street, Newry Road, onto the Carrickmagh Cross Road, Ann Street, Park Street, Clanbrassil Street, Bridge Street, Newry Road. We also established that they generally used three border crossing points: Main Killeen Road, Eden Appa Road, Carrick-a-Stickin Road. On one occasion, we tracked them out to the Carrick-a-Stickin crossing. We observed a fair-haired male in his late 30s, early 40s in the front passenger seat. At all times, the man, who we now know to be Bob Buchanan, was driving the car. We now moved from a purely surveillance-based operation to a military operation. This was around the end of 1988 into very early 1989. We proceeded on the basis that they could use any of the crossings between Tullydonnell and Killeen, inclusive, to return home. The operation was planned around 3 stages: arrest, question, and execute those on board. Prior to March 20th, 1989, we mounted a military operation on 3 occasions. Twice the car didn't show. On the 3rd occasion, it was tracked using the Eden Appiaha Road on the return journey. However, due to unconnected high levels of enemy activity in the general area, we were unable to execute the operation. On Monday, March the 20th, 1989, we again put the military operation in place. We planned to keep it in place for 7 days with a review after 3 days. Surveillance was placed on Dundalk Garda Station from number 12, the Crescent. Other volunteers were in place to track the car leaving Dundalk town. The communication system, which had already proved efficient and reliable, was also put in place. 2 armed operational squads were put on the ground. One was based in the Forkill area to cover the Carrick-a-Stickin and Teevcrum roads. The second squad was based in the Jonesboro area to cover the O'Mead, Killeen, Flurry Bridge, Eden Appa, and Carrick Broad roads. At approximately 12:30 p.m., the Red Cavalier arrived at Dundalk Garda Station and parked in the usual spot. The communications system was activated at approximately 2:30 p.m. The car was tracked, leaving Dundalk Garda Station via the Harp Brewery route onto the Newry Road. The car was tracked en route to the Eden Appa Road. The active service unit in the Jonesboro area had already been alerted and had moved into place, setting up a checkpoint at a pre-picked spot along the Eden Appa Road. The ASU intercepted the Red Cavalier. The 2 male occupants were challenged to step out of the car with their hands up. The car was put into reverse and attempted to escape. At that point, both RUC detectives were executed. The instructions to the ASU were to intercept the car and arrest the occupants, but if that was not possible, then they were to ensure that neither occupant escaped. Documents of an intelligence interest belonging to both RUC men, found in the car, were removed from the scene by the ASU.